When we're talking about safety culture, I want to, I guess, reinforce some of the earlier speakers today. The starting point for safety culture is always going to be your senior management team. You're never going to have a safety culture that progresses past or remains past the vision of your senior management. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about what they say specifically. I'm talking about what they actually do. Any executive, any senior management person, any CEO, anyone with the title of vice president or president or anything like that, if you ask them, they're going to say, yes, safety is number one. Safety is the most important thing we do. Of course, safety is very important. But if that's a statement that comes out on a rare occasion, if that's not a visible part of their decision making, if it's not part of their day-to-day dialogue, like everything else that they do, then you're not going to, the culture isn't going to progress beyond that. Okay? Safety has to be a lot more than a slogan. It has to be a part of the way that you talk about everything else in the operation. It has to be part of the way that you promote and reward and discipline people. It has to be part of your everyday conversation, and it has to be part of all your meetings. Another thing, and this is something that if there's one point that I could make that you would take away and forget everything else that I would say, it's that there is not an inherent conflict between safety performance and operational efficiency or product quality or customer service or employee satisfaction. There are a lot of times in our industry and what we do that we find ourselves in a situation where it looks that way. You say, man, I could do this safe, or I could do this safely, or I could do this efficiently, but I can't, from where I'm standing, I can't see both. And what that means is that at some point, maybe not then, at some point in the past, you or somebody else has made a managerial or even a strategic decision that was wrong. And when you find yourself in that position, you've got to back up a few steps and look and see where you are. Now, I could stand up here and talk all day about examples of that. Things where we perceive, in short-sightedness, we perceive a conflict between those things, but in reality, there never should be. And I throw that out there, but I don't mean to make it sound easy, because a lot of times it's really difficult. A lot of times you have to struggle, you have to experiment, you have to step back and try new things, and a lot of times you're going to fail. But you can never accept a compromise between any of those things in safety. And I always coach the people that I work with that you should never be sympathetic. You should never be, as a manager, you should never be apologetic for demanding all of those things. One other aspect, and again, a couple people have mentioned it earlier today, but we work in an industry where, for a lot of different reasons, that sites and operations get traded back and forth. And so the reality that we work in is that a lot of our cultures are composite cultures. They're different from site to site and region to region and even between different lines of business. And as safety professionals, we have to recognize that, identify that, and react appropriately at each stage. Safety culture isn't something where one size fits all, where one program or one methodology, where one way of doing things is going to work for everybody all the time. So you have to adjust your approach. We have to adjust our approach to safety depending on where that culture is in the progression. Okay. And before I get into that, I want to talk for a few minutes about safety professionals. Now, you heard my title, Manufacturing, Health, and Safety. Well, I'm I shouldn't use the word retread, but I'm somebody who, mid-career, was, I didn't get anything else taken away. My responsibilities were expanded to include safety. And there's a lot of, I mean, if you look out across the group of safety professionals, there's a lot of people that take that track. But the more important thing, everybody in safety, their number one responsibility, their number one skill set has to be that they are a change agent. If you have the type of safety professional who's a phantom, that this is a person that can go to a site, walk the entire site, see everything and leave, and nobody will know he was there, then you don't have a good safety professional. This is somebody that has to be involved, has to be active, has to be visible, has to be a part of what's going on. Okay. Now, you're going to have a mixture of, most organizations are going to have a mixture of career safety professionals, and you're going to have you know, some mid-career transition managers. And both of those backgrounds are really important to what you're trying to do. The primary responsibility for safe behavior, for safe work, for safe conditions is always needs to be line management. Okay? And so you need people in your safety organization that understand the day-to-day role, the challenges, the work environment, the difficulties that line managers face. That is absolutely indispensable. You also need the career safety, you know, the career-long safety professionals, and they bring a background, particularly, well, in a lot of technical fields, anywhere from compliance to industrial hygiene to ergonomics. You know, there's a broad list of things that you need, and both of those backgrounds are indispensable. It's very rare you'll find those all in one person, vanishingly rare, but you need both in the organization. And every background has something to contribute, and every background has something that's missing, and we need to coach those people to you know, to try and bridge that gap, close that learning gap as much as they can. Now, again, being change agent, primary role is that safety professional has to present himself as a resource to line management. The idea of a safety cop, of the gotcha police, or whatever you want to, however you want to describe that, is very adversarial, and it just doesn't work. It's not a good compliance model. It's not a good safety model. It's not a good change management strategy. It's just, it's something that I had a predecessor that did this in a part of the company, and I mean, people just cringed anytime they saw a safety guy show up on site. No, it was not Tom. It was not, but you know, you can't be adversarial. You've got to, your safety manager can never take the attitude, your safety professional team can never take the attitude that this is your problem. It always has to be our problem. Okay. Now, earlier today, Tom had a slide. I think it was the talking about milestones of safety culture and progression. He had a very professional looking, like an arc with an arrow on it, and it was a little embarrassing. This is my version of the same thing. But I use it to illustrate some points about important milestones, and like anything that you know, that managers do, because I am still a manager, it's going to be oversimplified, and that's not always all bad. But obviously, at the far left of the chart, you're going to see that you're going to, in fact, and if you look around our industry, you can find areas that just companies or sites that don't have a safety culture. And the easiest way to do that is you ask them about injuries, and the answer is, well, that's just a part of being in this business. It's part of what we do. There's always been injuries. There's always going to be injuries. It's just the way things are. It's very, very easy to peg. So the first step, and the thing that you have to do before you're ever going to get past that, before you're ever going to get started down the track of real, genuine safety improvement, is you've got to have ownership of that process. The line managers need to feel like their safety performance is a part of their job and is reflective of their performance overall. They've got to see that injuries and accidents are not an integral, not just an inseparable part of the way we do business. They have to look at it as a failure. They have to say somehow, somewhere, something went wrong, and this safety performance is a reflection on me and in the way I do my job. And if you try and do anything downstream of that, if you don't have ownership, if you try and skip that step, you're never going to go anywhere. You will get programs, slogans, activities. I'll even, a little bit later in the discussion, I'll show you some ways where you can actually improve your safety score without doing anything. But you're never going to make any real progress. Okay. Now, if you have the ownership, that's when, and again, this is an oversimplification, but that's when you can get into a real in-depth functional process where you can do a root cause analysis. The root cause analysis takes the accident and injury, because remember we talked about an injury, we said first it's indispensable. Well, pretty early in the stage, a lot of people will say, you know what, he got hurt because he wasn't paying attention or it was his fault. If you can do a good root cause analysis, and that, again, that's not an easy step, but that's the point where your management team says, hey, this is my part in that responsibility, or this is my responsibility in that action or that condition or that behavior that caused the injury. Even if it's something that our worker has been told that they're not supposed to do, the fact is, you know what, I've seen them do that. I suspected that they did that, but you know what, I didn't say anything about it. Could be the way we train. It could be the way the job is designed. But root cause analysis is really the management accepting fault, responsibility, some role in that process that's broken down. If you can do that root cause analysis well, and that's, again, that's not an easy thing. That's something that has to be coached. That's something that, when I went through it, when I saw people go through it, there were a lot of times that things would come back and we'd think we did a great job on it, and actually sometimes from Tom it would come back and say, no, you didn't. This isn't even scratching the surface. Okay, so it takes a while to do that. But if you're good at that, once you've got that down, you're at the point, your organization is at the point, your managers are at the point where they can start to redesign some of the job functions. You can think about the way that you assign responsibilities to your workers, the training, the tools, and the resources that you give them, even the basic process flow that you may have at some of your sites. You can start to tweak that in ways that are going to make it safer and more productive and put out a higher quality product. And the reason I put this in order is if you can't do a good root cause analysis, how good are you going to be at redesigning somebody's job function or reassigning resources or training? There's going to be some hit and miss, but you're not going to be very effective overall if you haven't reached that stage yet. Okay. There was some, we kind of scratched the surface this morning on some behavior modification strategies. Now that you have these redesigned job functions and you started to think differently, doesn't mean that everybody in your workforce has. And even if you are redesigning jobs and there's no comprehensive set of safety rules or conditions that you could ever list out that would prevent all your accidents and injuries. So you're going to have to do some of this, some of that assessment, some of that reaction is always going to have to be on the workforce. Okay, and then finally, when you get to the highest stage of development, you've got a fully functioning safety management system, and I'll talk a little bit more about that or how I see that working later on. Okay. Now, I think everybody in here has probably seen a pyramid like this or something similar to it. The numbers at each stage will vary a little bit, but the concept is still all the same. Okay. And the better you get, the farther your safety culture advances, the farther down that pyramid you're going to measure. Okay? It's not difficult. In fact, there are companies out there, I mean, they measure their safety performance, again, just based on that, this doesn't have a laser pointer, but just based on the very top of that pyramid. They're saying, you know what, this is our fatality rate. And that's it. And that's really kind of a sad and cynical way to look at it, but I mean, you can still find companies that do that. If you look at the really first, I think, good solid point there that I want to talk about is the difference between a recordable injury and a near miss. Because that's the difference between, well, there's a couple important things that happen there. One, that's the difference between a leading and a lagging indicator. Everything below that line is, you know, for an analogy, everything below that line is the windshield. Everything above that line is the rear view mirror. And it's also, that's an important point in your measurement system because that's where you start to get, or that's where the lowest point in there where you're going to get good, solid, reliable numbers. They're not perfect, but that's still going to be your best measurement scheme. Yes, if you look at recordable injuries, you're going to find instances where you got tagged with a recordable injury that you probably shouldn't have. You know, somebody was just being some combination of employee wimpiness and doctor sympathy is going to result in a recordable injury. And as much as managers like to complain about that, for every one of those that happens, you probably have 2 or 3 people with genuine injuries that limp home, that leave work early, that get treatment, that you know, if you've got a safety incentive, then there's a lot of people, or there's a lot of incentive to, a lot of motivation for people to hide injuries, and it happens. Particularly in, you know, if a manager feels like safety is part of their responsibility, and the managers get hurt, I've seen guys that would, you know, they were driving home and say, well, you know, they'll call you and they'll say, I cut my finger, but it's no big deal. You know, it doesn't need to, you know, it's just, I wanted to get it taped up a little bit, but it's definitely, you know, I don't need to see anybody about it. And you force them to come back in and you send them to the clinic and they end up needing like 16, 18 stitches in one case. You know, when they're on the phone, they talk to you like it's a borderline injury. It's something that, you know, it doesn't really need to be looked at, but you end up with 18 stitches. Okay. Near-miss reporting is not going to be that solid. You know, there's very, even in the best situations, there's very few workers that are really anxious to run up to you and say, you'll never believe the stupid thing I just did. Oh, I was so lucky that, you know, there's a reluctance to do that. But it's something, if you've got, you know, again, some of the suggestions earlier that I thought was great was, you know, the anonymous tip box. You know, if you've got a forum where that can be discussed, it's not going to be perfect, but the better you do with near misses, again, that's a leading indicator that gives you the opportunity to react to it rather than, or to be proactive rather than reactive. And of course, if you have a good safety management system, you know, if you're looking at all the leading indicators, whether they're behavioral or cultural, it gives you a real advantage, a real heads up on where your safety performance can go. I like some of the examples that we got this morning with the, you know, not that there aren't plenty in every industry, but with the space shuttle. How many, if you look back and so all the number of near failures that they had with those O-rings for the Challenger, it was incredible. You know, they didn't, in that case, they didn't jump from an unsafe condition all the way to multiple fatality. I mean, they had warnings of that. And almost every incident, almost every you know, serious injury or fatality that I've ever looked at or been a part of the investigation, there's always been leading indicators for that. There's always things that you look at in hindsight and you say, you know what, we should have seen this coming. one other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is, and I just wanted to comment on it briefly. Now, this subject by itself can overwhelm a debate that lasts, you know, for days on end. But I just wanted to, you know, there's a lot of good points to be made on either side of the argument, but I just wanted to kind of throw a couple of them out there. And that's when you pay someone a bonus for those trailing indicators. You know, most common one is an organization will go, you know, a quarter or 6 months or a year without any recordable injuries, and you pay them a monetary bonus for that. It really, on the good side, it does help with awareness and ownership. You attach money to something, it does get people's attention when you first do it. If you do it as a group, you know, again, you say it's a site reward for site performance, it is going to motivate interaction between people. You're going to get people interacting a lot around safety. It will very quickly change the, hey, this is my business and you stay out of it mentality to everybody gets involved with everybody else. And it will reduce the inconsequential injuries, you know, the false positives. On the bad side, it will almost certainly lead to underreporting of real injuries. It's almost a guarantee that's going to happen. And more importantly, and I probably should have put this point up here first, but it's not going to do anything for you beyond awareness. It is a decent way to go from terrible to bad, or maybe even terrible to average, but it's not going to take you, it's not one of those good to great moves. And the problem is, if you start it, you know, if you use it as a strategy to go from bad to average or something like that, it becomes an entitlement. And then everybody's mad for, you know, a couple of years after you take it away. And of course, anytime you put something in a bonus plan, you have to numerically weight that against other goals, and then that becomes a point where, you know, it becomes comparative. People say, you know what, my bonus is based 30% on safety, 50% on production, and, you know, at 20% on other things. And that automatically sets a hierarchy and a priority in their head. And that's not the message you always want to send. And of course, an obvious one, you may just be rewarding luck instead of the right behavior. And again, this could occupy we could have a whole seminar just based on this subject, and we probably still won't exhaust all the things that we could talk about. Now, I also want to talk about some of the common mistakes. I'd like to think that these were all mistakes I'd seen other people make, but I think I can't think of any exceptions right now. These are mistakes that we have made at some point along the way, and I'm going to go through each one of these. But first one is, and thank you by the way, for bringing that up right before lunch. It was a perfect lead-in for what I wanted to talk about. But mistake number one is believing that compliance and safety are the same thing. They aren't. Regulation, or compliance, focuses on conditions and records, and it doesn't focus on behaviors. Again, it's almost like that bonus. Compliance will get you from, you know, it may move the needle a little bit from terrible to good or terrible to average, but if it doesn't address behaviors, then it's really not ever going to, ever going to do a lot for you. And the more important point, and this is one I want to talk about for just a little bit longer, is that compliance does not match safety performance. And I want to go through, now this isn't an industry-wide example, but this is something from inside the company that I wanted to talk to you all about. Okay, what I did, we have our aggregate operations in 2009, and I did this for an annual meeting a year ago, and I didn't redo the whole analysis, but it's still valid. But I'm using data from the whole of year 2009. I looked at a whole bunch of different metrics. I only put two basic ones up here. One was tons per citation, and again, you could look at citations, you know, violations per inspection hour, S&S violations per inspection. You know, there's a dozen different ways to skin that cat, but they all point in the same direction. The one I throw up here is tons per citation because I thought that took into account the size of the quarries a little bit better. And I also looked at the injury rate, and this is the recordable injuries per 200,000 labor hours. And I did that among our three different aggregate groups that we've had. Now, if you look at the tons per citation, or if you look at the compliance performance, how well these sites did at avoiding citations, then Division A, which is actually it was a division that we've sold since then, but our Kentucky operations, they had almost 190,000 tons of production for every citation that they received. So they were clearly the best performing in terms of compliance. And then we had two other divisions. One was kind of in the middle at 155,000, and one was the worst at 140,000. They had Division C, that was South Florida, they had the highest citation rate of anyone or of any group in our aggregates division. Then you compare that with the injury rates, and it was the complete opposite. Okay? The Kentucky quarries had 3.7 injuries per 200,000 hours. Central Florida, 2.1, and then South Florida, 0.6. Now, I'm not trying to make the point that compliance and safety performance are diametrically opposed or inversely proportional or anything like that. There's not a negative correlation between them. I'm just saying that there isn't a correlation between them. Okay? And now, one bonus thing I wanted to show while I was up here. If you look at terms of financial performance, the clear winner was South Florida aggregates. So if you look at the injury rates and the financial performance and the productivity performance, they line up perfectly. If you throw compliance into it, it doesn't line up. You can't draw a straight line between those points. Let me get back to. I wasn't sure I put that as a hyperlink. I wasn't sure I was going to cover it until lunchtime. Focus on compliance leads an organization to embrace minimum standards rather than best practices, and it also leads you to ignore non-regulated hazards. Very frustrating when somebody says, when you offer a suggestion, they say, well, we don't have to do, that's not the law, that's not a regulation. Doesn't matter. And finally, again, whole nother long discussion. I don't want to get into the hyperlink, but bureaucracies and mining companies, they have different goals. And again, you get caught up in the compliance equals safety. You're gonna send your organization down the wrong path, and it's going to be kind of frustrating for them. Mistake number two is to think that training by itself is going to change a culture. Okay, a couple comments. The training, well, first it has to be good training, and that's, while that should be obvious to everybody in here, as soon as I got the word safety added to my title, before I even had my business cards printed, I was getting 2 or 3 calls a week from safety training companies, and they were all, their selling point was bragging about how they could take required training and compress that into a shorter and shorter and smaller time frame. We'll have your employees covered in 20 minutes a month, no problem. So it's got to be good training. And the second thing, and it's probably where we stumble the most, is that training has to be followed by the opportunity and the expectation to apply it. If you're going to do root cause analysis training for somebody, and that's a pretty detailed class if it's done right, you better get them out there doing a root cause analysis. And there's got to be coaching and feedback and practice. There's probably more learning that takes place after the class than does during the class. And also the training has got to be appropriate to the stage that we're in. Now, we went through a big integration a few years ago. We had Rinker Materials and CEMEX that merged together. And they were two organizations that were at very different stages of development. And one of the big mistakes that I saw made, and actually one of the reasons that I have the role that I have today, is that somebody said, you know what, we'll take this organization and we'll throw all of the training at them at once. We'll teach them root cause analysis, we'll teach them to write a job hazard analysis, we'll throw a behavior observation program on it, and we'll jump from, you know, the one side of that developmental stage. We'll just go straight to the front of the line. And they floundered for a year and a half and got absolutely nowhere for doing that. Okay, number 3, let me speed up, I don't know, I think I'm doing okay on time. Mistake number 3 is you can manage change in the culture without training. There's obviously, you know, advancement moving along that requires different ways of thinking and new skills. And you're not going to teach somebody to do a root cause analysis or put together a good safety observation program without that training. Important point I wanted to make that if the way forward in safety is reinventing your processes, a lot of times experience and seniority will work against you. And so training is one way to help with that. It forces managers into multidisciplinary approaches. One of the, it's always kind of amusing that I mean, you can see, I've seen this happen several times where you get a manager that walks in and says, look, they come into a meeting and say, I've got to fire this person, and this person because they're fat and they're going to get hurt. And, and they're just absolutely certain. And then you've got the HR manager who's standing up saying, whoa, stop, we can't even talk about that. And, and they both have a really valid point to make, and it's a great discussion to have. But when you take ownership of safety, it forces people to think in terms that they've got to look at multidisciplinary, they've got to look at the impact, on the overall process, and it forces them to think in the bigger picture. Okay, and of course, training, because of that, training is not always going to be limited to health and safety. Okay, I promised you earlier that we would talk about ways that you could actually improve your safety scores without doing anything, and so I wanted to talk about a couple of those shortcuts now. The first one is take advantage of administrative loopholes, and there's a real easy one, and I've seen this done before. It's using light duty to reclassify lost time injuries into restricted duty injuries. If you are creative enough and tolerant enough with your light duty program, you can very effectively bring down your lost time injury rate to an incredibly low level. It's very, very easy to do. Okay, and I've seen a lot of horrific injuries there was incredible amount of effort and creativity applied to the light duty program, where we had people like driving to the hospital with manuals and paperwork saying, you know what, if I could get him to read this manual for an hour in the hospital and sign in a sheet, and that will count as the person worked. Or literally they pick them up in a medical service limousine, drive them into the site, the person reaches out the window, signs in on the sheet, and they drive them back home. There's ways to cheat that, but you're really not making any improvement. The other one that I've seen that's really common is subcontracting. Something is dangerous, something is difficult, something is really tough to manage somehow. Well, we'll subcontract it, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I've seen it in a lot of cases where subcontracting was used to say, you know what, it's just not my problem anymore. I'm not handing it over to experts and professionals. I'm handing it over to people that have their own OSHA reporting to worry about, and I don't care what happens. Okay, another one, soft or self-reported measures. A few years ago, we had, in some of our areas, we had a near-miss reporting contest that was based on quantity. So the district that reported the most documented near misses got a reward for it, and it was just a complete paperwork waste of time. Some of the stuff that was sent in was just ridiculous. We didn't learn anything from it. We didn't act on it. It was just an administrative snafu. Okay. Another thing, any kind of data, managers do this instinctively with production-related numbers, and we need to do the same thing with safety-related reporting. Is no matter what we're looking at, we always need to understand how that gets collected, how that gets compiled, and how that gets reported, because inaccuracies you know, can really send you off in the wrong direction.